Hello guys, hope you're doing really well and had a great start to your week. I'm Daniel Childs and today's Let's Talk Chelsea is going to be looking at the start under Enzo Maresca. Was I wrong with my pre-season concerns? And some people would accuse it of negativity or criticism. And we'll look for the numbers so far and what is to come for Chelsea. Or, maybe people are being a little bit too excited or going overboard in the moment, and maybe some pause for thought about what could still happen this season is relevant. But before we get into any of that, I want to say a massive thank you to the guys at Alloy Collectors for supporting the show. Defo, go down in the description box below, use my discount code SonOfChelsea for 15% off, not only to get yourself one of the amazing retro Chelsea kits from the late 90s, but of course the modern kits. There's going to be home and away kits, last season's kit, goalkeeper kits, and if you're just a general football fan, they do other clubs as well. But defo, great collectible to get, to put on your shelf, to give to a friend, family member, or maybe if you're already preparing in early October for Christmas to get a decent Christmas present. So get down in the description box below, use my discount code SonOfChelsea at Alloy Collectors for 15% off your order. But let's jump into it. So if you are watching my show, and many of you have been listening or watching on YouTube for an extended period of time, know that I wasn't that enthused, not only by the appointment of Enzo Maresca, but just generally what we saw over the course of the summer. That tracks back all the way to May when Mauricio Pochettino left, and basically so much that happened. I mean, so much happened over the course of the summer that it was hard to keep track of. You almost forgot how much did happen when you kind of looked back and you're like, oh yeah, that whole thing happened. Neil Bath and Jim Fraser actually did leave over the course of the summer. Conor Gallagher left over the course of the summer. Of course, we had a change of head coach. We signed X number of players as well. And most recently, the reported fallout between Todd Bowley and Benedict Barley, which hasn't reached a resolution. So I always think that, I'm never going to apologise for giving you my honest view. I am not someone, despite like some others who I know have come under a lot of fire over the past week regarding their views about Chelsea and in quite a public forum. I don't say things just to get a rise out of people. I give you my honest view. If my honest view is one of real positivity, I'm going to be really positive. If my honest view is one of negativity, or what would be deemed negative or just critical, I'm going to say that as well. That's always been the way I've approached this show for 10 years now, over 10 years, is just giving you my honest view. Like, you guys have your honest views about Chelsea. And I've also always been someone, as I have in the past when we won the Champions League under Tuchel, is happy to be proven wrong. And when things go well and I'm proven wrong, I couldn't care less about my original opinion being proven wrong, because it means that Chelsea are being successful. If what we are seeing now is the beginning of a brilliant season under Enzo Maresca, where we get back in the Champions League, we do really well in the Premier League, some players really perform outstandingly well, maybe we win a cup or especially the Conference League, and at the end of the season we look back and we've substantially improved from last year, I'm not going to sit here and still tell you everything's crap, because obviously that would just be absolutely nonsense. And it would also be nonsense just in the isolation of all this to go, where it's only October, so there's no point judging anything. I'm not one of those people either. I at the start of this year, I was told that I couldn't judge anything properly. It'd be unfair to judge anything when we lost to Man City, for instance, or we had struggles against Servette, or we drew to Crystal Palace, that it was totally unfair to judge anything until like Christmas. I think the logic of that argument, usually by people who don't like negativity, if you follow that logic to its conclusion, then the recent positive weeks also have to be written off, because by that logic, you can't judge anything we do until Christmas, which, again, is kind of illogical to me. There's got to be a nuance, right? That when things are going well, we can judge it. It doesn't mean that we make a conclusion on the season on the 1st of October. That's obviously nonsense. But let's look at the start of the season. So obviously started off that Man City defeat, which was discouraging. It wasn't a great day. It wasn't an awful day, but it wasn't the most exciting day given how we competed against them last year. We then, of course, beat Servette. It wasn't the greatest performance, but it got us through, really, or gave us that platform in the playoff of the Conference League. But then we had that amazing second half performance, especially second half performance against Wolves, 6-2, a ground we rarely ever win at. Really dominant performance. performance and really great attacking performance. But then we lost to Servette 2-1 in the second leg, but of course went through, and that was much closer than it should have been. For a B team, it was a really poor performance. The Palace game, we had a lot of great chances. We dominated for periods, but I thought in the second half we became a little bit more chaotic, and there were some concerns with Chelsea's structure there, but it wasn't an awful performance and frustrating. Then, of course, we beat Bournemouth. Again, not an amazing performance, but context, it's a difficult round for Chelsea, and Christopher Nkunku coming up late for a big performance. West Ham, a convincing performance, the most convincing of the season so far, really, in the Premier League. We can talk about West Ham structural issues, but Nicholas Jackson having an amazing performance, and all round a really, really good day at another historically difficult ground for Chelsea. Of course, beating Barrow 5-0, you expect that. And then Brighton, beating them 4-2. Although we did beat them at home last year, Brighton came into the game undefeated in the Premier League, and we saw some amazing individual performances. And I just thought all round collectively, another big result for Enzo Maresca. If you do a point comparison, which I've done for several years, I don't know how much I've talked about it on the show. I just find it quite interesting to look at points comparisons based on the coefficient, I think some people would call it, or basically looking at the identical fixtures as best you can from last year. Of course, that fluctuates because teams get promoted, teams get relegated. But Man City at home, that's -1 from last year, but +3 away to Wolves, -2 at home to Palace. But then you add +2 away at Bournemouth, +3 against West Ham, level with, of course, Brighton. So Chelsea slightly better so far from where they were. I think for a lot of people, the Wolves, Bournemouth and West Ham away games will be seen as massive because we've, 8 or 9 points, I think it is overall. Yeah, 8 points at least off last season, which is good, right? And hopefully that will pay dividends at the end of the season. In terms of some numbers, in terms of where Chelsea are in the Premier League so far, 15 goals so far in the Premier League. That makes us the top goal scorers so far in the Premier League, which is pretty impressive. Closest is Liverpool, Arsenal and Spurs. They've scored 12. Defensively, we're not exactly tragic. I mean, we've only conceded 7 goals. You know, that's only 2 more than Arsenal have, 1 more than Man City. Liverpool way out in front with only 2 conceded. But again, defensively, it's not bad, and our goal difference is decent as well. And our form since the start of the day has been pretty good, nearly almost faultless if we hadn't have drawn that game to Crystal Palace, who we usually beat. And we're 2 points off the top of the league. I mean, going into, if Chelsea continue this form, we beat Nottingham Forest at home at the weekend, there's a likelihood, dependent on other results, we could be top or close to it. I mean, even being that close is obviously really positive. There's no way of getting around it. Enzo Maresca has had a very, very successful start to this Premier League season based on the pre-season feeling, the pre-season predictions. I mean, my prediction, and you can go back and watch it, I'll link it, but my prediction in pre-season, despite again being accused of constant negativity, I predicted Chelsea to finish 5th, which could actually give you Champions League football if England's coefficient works out better this year. And, you know, that's not even the most negative. I was on that Chelsea pod, and even Nick was telling me that his pre-season prediction was actually worse. You know, he had us at 6th, which is the same as last year. So I wasn't the most negative. I saw pre-season predictions that had us as low as like 12. So I wasn't even close to there. So some context there, you know, even though my frustrations, I still did predict us before a ball was kicked to finish 5th. So I want us competing for the Champions League. But obviously it's been a really positive start to the year. The attack is clicking. It's great that Cole Palmer is proving a lot of my doubts and others wrong, that, you know, he's able to flourish under Enzo Maresca. Let's hope that continues. Nicholas Jackson is very much picking up where he left off last season. Jadon Sancho looks like he's adapted and settled in very comfortably, very quickly for Chelsea. Moises Caicedo also picking up where he left off. Noni Madueke had some really good, strong performances. We've seen the slow integration of Christopher Nkunku, who's already scoring quite a few goals this year. There still are some questions, I think, defensively, but it's great that both Levi, Colwell and Fofana are starting to make a back to, especially Levi. We've already spoke on the channel this year in the podcast about Levi's influence as kind of a playmaker on the ball. That's really positive. And there's still our concerns, right? I still have, you know, feelings about Enzo Fernandez, especially off the ball, concerns there. We obviously have concerns about Robert Sanchez in goal. I think they will still be relevant. But listen, from what it could have been, from where it was this time last year, where we didn't have many points or wins on the board, there's no getting around it. Enzo Maresca as well, from a style point of view, I think has also impressed and pleasantly surprised a lot of us as fans, because it's not slow, repetitive, really dull passing football. It's very transitional, it's aggressive, it's in your face, it's pressing, it's energetic, and I think that very much sits a lot better with the Stamford Bridge crowd than, say, Sarri's football or at times Tuchel's football. Again, we have a short and small sample size to judge Enzo Maresca at Chelsea, and is this the early signs of like him? This is not kind of, of course you cannot assume this is what his final version of Chelsea is going to be, but this is maybe not his perfect vision of Chelsea, or maybe he has, I think to his credit, adapted to circumstance and adapted to the club he's at, adapted to the pressure he's under, and he's got the best out of players. And so far this season, especially from an attacking point of view, he's done brilliantly, and the players are producing to a high level, and you cannot argue with that. So let's hope that continues. So obviously we've got the Forest game. Now, I do think there is reason to be a little bit hesitant, and that's not me saying the season's about to implode, or Chelsea, if they do struggle in the next run of games, it's a reason to turn back negative again. Obviously not. It's just, given some lofty ambitions, very lofty ambitions from people, I do think there is reason why even some of the comments I've seen on my shows recently, asking for people to be a little bit more restrained in their analysis, is because things get significantly tougher for Chelsea right after the international break. So we've got Forest at home, who have only lost one game. They've just lost their first game of the season at home to Fulham, but that could be a very tricky game. We had a really tough contest with them at the back end of last season. Of course, we failed to beat them, and they actually won at Stamford Bridge last season. So let's hope we can end that poor form against Forest at the weekend. But then after the international break, it's straight into a brutal game, really. Away at Anfield, who are at Liverpool, who are top of the league currently. They've had a brilliant start under Arne Slot. And then home to Newcastle, away to Manchester United, a ground we haven't won at since 2013 in the Premier League, and at home to Arsenal. That is a really tough run against some very good opposition. Yes, we have to factor in between those games, there is the beginning of the Conference League, which begins this Thursday against Ghent. And of course, also the Carabao Cup, which we will face either Newcastle again. It could be a double header basically against Newcastle. We could face them at home on the Sunday, and if they beat AFC Wimbledon tonight, as I'm recording this show, we'll face them a couple of days later at St James's Park. So this is where things get tricky, and I think that people are probably right in their assessment to look at that bunch of games and go, well, we're going to know a lot more about Chelsea's kind of ceiling this season. If Chelsea come out of that game and they're still 2 points off the top, that's an incredible position to be in. There's no getting around that. We're then fully into November, before the November international break, and of course, barring what happens in the Conference League and Carabao Cup, and hopefully we progress well in those two, you can then seriously look at this team and Enzo Maresca's job and add more positivity to it. Because if we go up to Anfield and we get a positive result, I'm even saying I think a point is a positive result. We're able to beat Newcastle at home, which we did last year. We're able to win at Old Trafford. They're obviously having struggles under Erik ten Hag again right now. We haven't won at that ground for a long period of time, but I think we really should be aiming to do it sooner rather than later, given the struggles that Man United have had. And then, of course, Arsenal at home, which we were very close to beating them last year. So I'm talking at home, obviously not away, but at home we were a couple minutes away from obviously beating them. So I feel that that's going to tell us a lot. And it's more just, I think for me, those games are more a case of us being competitive in them. I think my concern and frustration with that opening Man City game, and yes, in reflection, it is the opening game of the season, was we were a bit too passive against Man City for my liking. I think we have to be a lot more aggressive, and we've got to try to bloody the nose. Not in a silly way, not in a naive way, but just, I don't want to see us kind of just be held at arm's length by better teams. I accept that we're probably obviously not at the level of Liverpool right now, especially Arsenal. You know, Arsenal were competing for the Premier League title, Man City. But there is also a thing that we had last season that I think impressed and encouraged people, was we at times did go toe-to-toe with these teams. And I'm not asking Enzo Maresca that he has to beat Liverpool away from home, that he has to beat Arsenal at home. But I think we have to show something in those games. We have to hurt those teams in some way, because then you can feel a sense of progression. If he could win against Arsenal or Liverpool, especially the Arsenal game at home, that's a huge win. That is a huge win. Those are moments that will be landmark victories for Enzo Maresca. And I think the positive thing is if we can beat Forest, we're then going into that run with a lot of positivity, momentum. Hopefully, you always fear over the international break players getting injured, but Maresca has also been kind of blessed by the fact of a strong squad, but also a lot of touchwood players who have remained fit compared to last year, which is real positive. Let's hope that continues as well. So really, listen, maybe my negativity was too much, and I'm always happy to be proven wrong. I will contest and I will say it is only October, and that's not me saying we don't celebrate, because obviously if you've watched my reaction to the Brighton game, if you've watched my reactions in recent weeks, we've been very positive because the performances have been very good. When they're not as good, obviously we're not as positive. So that's just a natural cycle of things, but I think some perspective is needed, and that's going both ways. That's maybe not being too positive in a sense that, you get to a point where you think that Chelsea are infallible now, and then maybe that leads to an alternative extreme reaction if suddenly we go a few games without winning again. But then there's also balancing that out with, listen, if we don't win against Liverpool, if we do lose to them in a tight affair, it's not the end of the world, is it? So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. I think the progression of this team is going to be very interesting, because I still think the standard and the average kind of expectation for me, and I think for many others, is Champions League football. I think that is still the main aim of Chelsea. This is a long, grueling season. I think back to years under Frank, even under Sarri, even under Tuchel, where we had very strong starts to the year, and then we hit that kind of winter curse, I used to call it a lot, by Chelsea, because it happened very frequently, where you'd spend the first few months, especially autumn, in really good form, and then we'd hit November, December, and by the time we got to February, we'd be in a real slump, and it'd be then quite clear we're in the slog for Champions League football. And listen, if it's that kind of season for Maresca, that's not a disaster. Compared to very recent years, especially under Clearlake, that's an improvement, given where we were before their takeover, competing for Champions League football. That's what we were regularly in the Premier League. So that is still the main aim, and I'm not going to go overboard with Chelsea on it and are in a title race, because we weren't ever expected. My expectations were never for us to be in a title race. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.